How's it going, guys? Welcome to the Talk4 Podcast. So excited to have you here today and show you this fantastic episode. Just want to say quickly that episodes like this one and all the ones before and the ones in future are made possible by people who subscribe. Hopefully, just like you. I'm going to ask you today if you can leave a subscribe, leave a follow, leave a rating, leave a like or a comment, and just support the show in the little ways that you can, like that. It makes a huge difference on my end. And quickly, just want to plug as well. I've taken 30 of the best episodes of this podcast and turned them into a fantastic book that goes into 150 secrets to greatness. Each one of those 30 episodes gets crunched down into 5 of the best key takeaways from the whole talk and turns them into a fantastic book. Highly recommend you check it out. Please support the show by grabbing a copy, either a paperback or an ebook. And I can't wait to show you guys this one today. So, guys, without further ado, let's get over to the episode. How's it going, guys? Welcome to episode 152 of Talk4, the Quickfire podcast, where we ask 4 great questions to unique and interesting people. Today is certainly not an exception. This is a great one and a massive bucket list item ticked off. But let's introduce. So, behind the mic today is your host, Skupien. That's me. Let me introduce our very special guest for today, Susan Kilrain, who's going to be answering some questions today. So, Susan, how are you doing today? Welcome to the show. I'm very honored to have you here.
No, it's great to meet you, Louie. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, this is going to be so much fun. And I know I mentioned to you just a minute ago, but when I first started, I had this bucket list of the most incredible people I could possibly think of to have on the show. And an astronaut would have always been one of them. And I looked back at it, 2022, got to have an astronaut one day. And it's taken this long to get here, but I am just thrilled about this. So this is going to be amazing. But without spoiling too much myself, I'd love to get your take on you basically then. So a quick elevator pitch and just all about you basically then. So kind of 30, 60 seconds, the quick kind of snapshot of the life of you and just kind of what you get up to and who you are would be a great place to start. Then we're going to dig into it on the big scale. So yeah, start us there.
Great. Well, I'm Susan Kilrain. As you know, I'm an astronaut, but before that, I was a Navy test pilot, and before that, or an F-14 pilot. Before that, a aerospace engineer. I worked for Lockheed for a while, but I grew up in Georgia with 3 brothers. And then coming the other direction after I flew in space, I went back to the regular Navy for a while. I have 4 kids, married to a Navy SEAL. I have reinvented myself since I retired from the Navy, and I'm just doing a whole bunch of things these days.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty great story written so far. And by the looks of everything I'm seeing here and checking out all the stuff that you've been up to and are up to right now, it's not slowing down or stopping there. So, you've gone from one thing and you're just keeping it going. I can't wait to see where it all ends up. But let's start right at the very beginning of all this then, because on the show, we love to look at backstory and just figure out where people came from and kind of learn some of those lessons that they were picked up along the way to get to where they got to and where they are. So, your journey from the US Navy to becoming an astronaut is obviously nothing short of just pure inspiration. So, can you just walk us through those early years then from training as a Navy pilot to your decision to pursue a career with NASA? So, kind of motivations there. Was it a family thing that kind of got you into it? Was it a pure you thing? And yeah, just any mentors along the way? Just a few bits like that would be great.
Sure. It all started back when I was a kid, to be honest, and I used to go to the airport with my dad to watch the airplanes take off and land, mainly because it was free and we had no money and that was entertainment. And I would just watch the airplanes for hours and thought one day I would love to be a pilot. Space wasn't on my radar. I was just kind of hoping someday I could fly an airplane. And I got the opportunity as a senior in high school. They had a program where you could miss a whole month of school. And if you were pursuing a career enhancing endeavor. And so I said I'd get my private pilot's license in a month. I don't think I realized how hard that would be to get private pilot's license in only 1 month. But I actually succeeded in doing that. And I was hooked on flying. And I wanted to fly anything and everything there was. And that sort of led into, hey, I could fly the space shuttle in space. But at the time, there weren't any women at NASA and the astronaut office. That would come shortly thereafter with Sally Ride. And I got my master's degree in aerospace engineering. I was working at Lockheed in Atlanta, and my boss put me in touch with an astronaut, Dick Scobie, who was the commander of the Challenger mission that didn't come home. But anyways, it was amazing to talk with him, and he recommended I join the military. Up until that moment, I had never considered the military or flying for the military. And he said, "Hey, you should join the military, become a test pilot, and try to be a space shuttle pilot." And that just sounded perfect to me because I could fly, I could get paid to fly, and it would make my application to NASA look better. And so that's where it all got started.
Wow, that is amazing. So obviously you get into the Navy and then you don't just obviously go straight to all these things. You got to have that progression there and stuff too. I know obviously you threw out the name of the F-14 Tomcat. Wow, what an absolute legend. I mean, so how did you kind of get into there? Yeah, just kind of walk me through that flying career a bit too and kind of lay the groundwork for what would then lead to NASA and Space Shuttle, which I've got so many questions to talk to you about that subject on. But yeah, let's start with the Tomcat.
Yeah, I got my private pilot's license before I went into the military. So the initial training in primary wasn't all that difficult for me. I mean, of course, it was learning a new airplane and it was faster and there was a lot more rigor in the training. But that part came fairly easy for me compared to folks that have never flown when they check in. And once I got through primary, I selected jets, which was huge because in order to be a space shuttle pilot, you had to be a jet test pilot, either go through Navy test pilot school or Air Force test pilot school. So I did get jets, and I went on to land on aircraft carriers and finally got my wings about a year later. And that's when I ran into some roadblocks because of the combat exclusion policy. Women weren't allowed to go off and live on an aircraft carrier and fly the fun jets that were flying on and off the carrier. So I stayed where I was and became a flight instructor for a couple of years, which was fun, and also it built up my flight time. I was able to get over 1,000 hours flying as an instructor. And then I went off to Key West and I was flying the EA-6A, which is the EA-6 is the A-6 is a tactical aircraft that flies off of carriers, or did at the time, but these were not used in a combat role. These were used in a training role where we had electronic pods that made us look like missiles of other countries, and we would attack our own ships. And the ships would have to defend against the attacking missile. And so it was a support role. And I started applying to test pilot school when I was there because I met all the requirements. I had the 1,000 hours, I had the academic degrees. But what was slowing me down is I wasn't flying a new aircraft, a tactical aircraft on and off of aircraft carriers. And they select people for test pilot school based on programs that they have for testing. And it wasn't until they were going to be testing a new training aircraft that they thought I was qualified because I had done so much time as a flight instructor. And so that's when I got accepted to test pilot school, which was the final step in being able to put in my application to NASA. But it was while I was at test pilot school that the combat exclusion policy was taken away for pilots. And I got a phone call one day from an admiral saying, "Hey, we'd like you to fly the F-14." And I said, "Sign me up." So I reported to the training squadron for the Tomcat in Oceana, or in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and started the training there.
It's brilliant. Really, really good stuff. So if we kind of look at the training aspect then and stuff too. So one of the things I like to ask my guests, especially people who've been fighter pilots or are fighter pilots, is just some of the key lessons that they learned that have shaped their kind of leadership profile. So if we look at you and the stuff that you've done within, the space of the space shuttle, even the things you're doing now with public speaking and book writing, which I know we're obviously going to get into, there's got to be like a really profound leadership profile there. And I'd love to see if there are any tiebacks to your time early on there with flying, off carriers, the Tomcat, all these aircraft, any things that you kind of really learned there while training on them and experiences that maybe really shaped who you would then become further and later down the line. There must be a few things there, right?
Oh, for sure. Everything I learned while flying, learning to fly, changing aircraft is was all built who I am and who I became. There's so many different leadership styles, and a wise person told me when I was entering the Navy to keep a notebook of leadership, the good and the not so good leadership that I encountered in my time. So I would write down like, so and so said this or did this, and why I thought that was a good or not a good leadership example. And so this sort of kind of helped me build what type of leader I wanted to be. Now, when you're in a jet and things are going wrong, um, things are falling apart and you're the pilot in command, it's going to be an autocratic leadership style. Nobody's going to question you. It's going to be, this is what we're doing. And then because I'm the one that's responsible for the aircraft and the crew. So that's just one leadership style that comes in handy in high crisis, dangerous crisis situations. But that's really the only time that that's a valuable leadership skill, I think, is when decisions have to be made instantaneously and you need people to do what it is you decide. And then, there's other leadership skills that are more suited to an environment, even in the military, even though technically it's an autocratic or a bureaucratic type of system, like a hierarchy. um, you still want to get the opinions of the people that work for you, especially the opinions of your middle managers. And so I like to be more bureaucratic, even as a mother raising my children. I like to get their opinions, even when they're little, but still my word is what they end up having to do. But have you ever tried to be autocratic against a 3-year-old? It just doesn't work. And then as they got older, or as I know my division, my military division better, and I learned their personalities, you can get more laid back about it, more laissez-faire, and trust that they're going to make the right decisions in the situations. So leadership isn't I don't think leadership style is a one kind of thing. It's what's right for the moment. And I try to adjust that based on good leadership that I learned throughout my career from
Yeah.
other leaders, from mentors.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, that's where it comes from. We learn it from other people and then we can pass it on then too. And that's obviously what you've done with your career. That's what you're doing now. And it's a great thing to see. So going into this, I think one thing I'm kind of noticing and kind of when I listen to you, I'm thinking it's so clear that you had this direct vision and the passion for space and flying a space shuttle, and you had this goal, and then it was just a case of, beeline however you can to achieving that goal. But obviously, I can imagine in, that era at that time, and you kind of alluded to it there a bit too, probably received a lot of pushback as a woman going into this. And I'd love to know kind of what it was like for you, really going through all of that too. So, did you ever have moments of doubt and kind of a bit of a wobble on that dream where you thought maybe it wasn't possible? Or did you always believe you were going to get there in the end, no matter what the path or journey was to it? And, if there was moments of kind of, adverse stuff where, you thought maybe it wasn't going to be possible because of the system and how it was shaped back then, what were some of those experiences, if you don't mind sharing?
Sure, of course, you can imagine there was a lot of adversity along the way. As long as I could see a path to my goal, then generally that gave me enough motivation to continue. even when I wasn't having fun whatever the situation was. There were a few times where I considered quitting, um, when things were just getting too, I don't know, in your face, like post tailhook scandal when the men were very they didn't like the women officers during that time, especially aviators, based on the situation of what happened at tailhook. And I honestly did consider quitting at that point. But I slept on it a couple of nights and I realized there was still a path to my goal. And so why would I let their opinions and get in the way of what I wanted to do? And all along I had said, as long as I was having fun and there was a path to get there, to get to the ultimate goal of becoming an astronaut, then I would push forward. And so that's what I just continue to do. And it's not always easy. And I had to let many things just slide off my back. Um, Comments, jokes, whatever, the locker room type banter. But that was my decision to do because it wasn't at a time where you could raise a flag and say, "Excuse me, I'm not being treated fairly." It really was the time to sit back and be quiet as long as nobody crossed whatever my line was. And that was the choice that I made.
Yeah,
And ultimately it worked out for me. But when you have a big goal like that, an almost impossible goal like that, I think the most important thing is that the journey is fun, enjoyable. You are enjoying your journey to that goal because you may not ever get there. And had I not ever made it to NASA, it would have been okay because I love flying airplanes. And I loved flying F-14s, and I wish I would have been able to go onto a carrier and because it wasn't long after I got to NASA where things were ramping up. Um, and But I got selected by NASA, and that was my dream all along. So that's what I went and did. But enjoy the journey is huge.
definitely. I want to ask you as well. So, something that I thought about recently, and you may have seen a bit of my stuff, but I'm really into aviation, and I got a couple of big dreams, and I'm going to achieve one of them soon. And it's flying in an F something jet, but I can't reveal what it is right now. But also flying the Spitfire, and I got really close to flying in a Spitfire one day, but I had that dream for as long as I could remember, and almost the thought of achieving that dream and getting there and finally having it and getting past that, it almost scared me a bit to even think about it. And I was almost a bit worried about achieving it because it's kind of like, what am I going to do then? So I'm just wondering, what was it like for you thinking about that going into it when you finally got that call? Did you ever have a moment where you sort of thought, I've been dreaming about this for my whole life. What am I going to do after it? Or do I even want to really achieve this because I enjoy the journey so much? I don't know. Did you ever have moments like that?
Not really. And it is an issue, especially with astronauts, that they fly in space and then there's a big now what? Especially when their time at NASA is over. I mean, if you read um, some of the books that have been written, it's like, now what? And Buzz Aldrin, he walked on the moon and he sunk into depression after his time at NASA. It's such a huge goal. And if you don't have other goals in life, that can be a problem. But I had other goals in life. I wanted to have a family someday. And so I moved straight from NASA to taking care of a family and then moved from that to the next goal. And I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro and then I wrote a book and so don't ever stop having those goals, those lofty dreams that may seem crazy to some people, but just there's always another goal, a ladder to climb or whatever. And if being in space was the only thing you ever wanted to do, two things could happen. You could not get there, perhaps, or you could get there and then now what? So I just always had another goal in life. And some would say I actually have quit everything I've ever done. And how can you be so successful and quit everything you've ever done? But I did. I quit being an engineer to go into the Navy. And I quit flying for the Navy to go to NASA. And I quit being an astronaut to keep my family in one location. So it's just like one thing after another. But it's worked for me.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to dig into NASA, the space shuttle, piloting it, all of this stuff in a moment. But I just want to fast forward just a tiny bit to ask this one question then. So you talk about those goals shifting and stuff, and I got to ask the question because I know you are an avid world traveler. I wonder if your experience flying in space and seeing the world from that perspective maybe gave you new goals from that experience. So, for example, I'm just trying to tie some dots together here. So, did seeing the world from up there give you kind of a new perspective on goals for traveling the world and seeing everything on the small scale after seeing it on such a large scale? I don't know. Did you get any kind of fresh revelations towards what you want to do after that from being up there?
From being in space, there, of course, my feelings about Earth did change it many times while I was in space, just from looking down at Earth. But as far as leading to future goals and travel, the one that comes to mind was seeing Kilimanjaro from space. And it was just this mountaintop sticking out of the clouds. And so it did sort of put that idea in my head to go full circle and climb that mountain. And when I did, I took um, a bunch of the photos that I had taken from space of the mountain and handed them out to the porters and everybody and saying that this is this mountain that I saw from space that we're now standing on top of. And that comes to mind as the one place I wanted to see. But Earth is amazing. And I've loved traveling Earth, both on Earth and going around Earth. It's just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. I'd love to ask what there's I know it's a pretty it's a pretty big question, and there's different ways of tackling it, but what does space do to your head when you go up there? So you talk about buzz, and we obviously that may have had adverse effects, or may have been so vivid for him at the time, and then there came that decline afterwards too for a variety of reasons. But I got to kind of ask then, because you had the experience of that, but that first time being up there looking down at Earth and seeing it from that perspective, what does it do to your head? How does it feel?
Well, I mean, if you want to talk about physically how it feels, it doesn't feel great. Everybody gets a headache when they go to space because the fluids stay up in their head. But then you talk about the big head. Well, yeah, the fluids are in your head. That physically makes it feel like a big head. But then there's also the look at me, I'm in space aspect of it. But when I flew in space, at least in my world, it was pretty common. We were launching space shuttles regularly. Lots of people have flown before me. I wasn't even the first woman pilot. Eileen Collins was. So all the doors, the glass ceilings, all had been shattered. And so in my world, I wasn't anything special. And I think that helps. Whereas in Buzz's world, he's the second man to walk on the moon. He was in that first landing, lunar lander, and so he was a rock star. And so that's a whole different mind game, if you ask me. I mean, to me, I was doing my job and I wasn't anything special compared to him, not even close.
Well, I see. I mean, I would have to disagree. I think you are incredibly special, and I can't wait to just see just how special as well. So, I mean, look, let's face it. If you think about cool jobs to do, fighter pilot, yeah, rock star. Space shuttle pilot, okay, now we're talking about a whole different thing. So, let's dig into it. So, how do you get selected to be the space shuttle pilot? And, how competitive is that? How many people are you up against? What's the process? Yeah, just give me a bit of info on that.
Wow. So every couple of years, NASA will take applications for astronaut. And if you're in the military, you apply through your military service. So I had to submit an application package that, contained pretty much everything I had done in my career to the Navy first. And then they decide whether they're going to send that application on to NASA. And so that happened while I was in test pilot school. And it was probably a year later when I was in the F-14 training squadron where I got the call that I was going to get an interview. And they interview about back then, they interviewed about 120 people over several weeks. So there were 20 of us that showed up at Houston for an interview, and it's like a 5 working day long interview, but most of it's medical testing, all kinds of medical testing and psychological testing. And the actual interview where you're at a long table with senior astronauts and management and all of that, that's only an hour long at most of the whole week. But you're being watched the entire time you're there. They notice. Somebody will say, will report like, not a very nice person to the nurses in the clinic or whatever. And so you're being interviewed every second. And my understanding is they interviewed about 7,000. I mean, they didn't interview, they had about 7,000 applications, but they interviewed 120 of us. I have no idea how they make their decisions because I think that most everybody who applies is qualified. And certainly the 120 people that they interview are qualified on paper. And I think at that point, they're just looking for a couple of things. One, the medical testing. You have to pass all your medical testing. And then when you're in that room at the long table and they're asking you questions, I honestly think they're just looking to see, are you someone they would want to fly in space with? Can you carry a conversation? Do you have a sense of humor? I think some people get asked technical questions. Thank goodness I didn't get asked any technical questions. They asked me, like, which airplane do you prefer, the F-18 or the F-14? And that was just because one guy at the table flew F-18s and one guy at the table flew F-14s, and they wanted to banter with each other. And so it was calm. I thought it was fun. The interview itself, nervous going in, but the reality of it was fun.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
then you go home and you wait. There were 3 women pilots interviewing, um, all in the same week I did. And so I was thinking, okay, so here is um, Pam Melroy interviewed with me. She also was selected, and she was an Air Force pilot. There was another Navy pilot. Both of them were senior to me, older than me, more flight hours than me. So I didn't think I would be selected. And I think that one of the things that stood out about me was I did come from the fighter pilot community, whereas the other women flew heavies, or Pam flew heavies. The Navy woman did not. I'm not sure why she didn't get selected. I would have thought she would have been the first one they would have selected. So I have no idea how they make their decisions, and it might have been a medical reason for all I know.
Mm.
But anyways, it was many months later, about 5 months later, when I got the phone call. And I was actually out in Key West, Florida, and I was dogfighting against an F-18. So it was Tomcat versus F-18. And the squadron duty officer called up on the radio and said I needed to return to base to make a phone call to NASA. And that's when the nerves sort of set in, as I was like, oh gosh, today's the day. I'm going to find out one way or the other. Did I get selected or did I not get selected? And if I didn't get selected, I already knew what was next. I was slated to go to the Eisenhower aircraft carrier, already on deployment. And so it was going to be one or the other, go to Houston or go to the carrier. So I got it back and I made the phone call, and the chief astronaut said, "How would you like to pilot the space shuttle?" So that was it. That was how he told me.
That's unbelievable. Oh my gosh. So what happens then? So you get the call and it's like, wow. So question one, I got so much stuff I want to ask you, but number one, did you manage to maintain the poker face and sound calm when you responded to him on that phone call, or were you just like, "Ah."
Yeah, no calm, no poker face, not at all. I was jumping up and down, and I was, you betcha, and I was so excited. And he said I'd get more information in the mail. That was back before we got a lot, email type stuff. So it would come in the mail, and the adrenaline was just, I was beside myself. I was ear to ear smiling. I told everybody. And then I went for a long run. I needed to do something with that just pent up energy. I had to somehow use that up. And then I put the credit card down at the bar that night.
Oh, oh no, that's always a bad idea to do, especially around aviators stuff I've learned. But I bet that was the fastest run time you've ever had. That one, I would be like literally supersonic doing a run if I had that news to go off as well. Absolutely amazing. So what happens then? So credit card gets stripped, then you're into the next morning after it. Do you have to jump straight into something, or is it still a long process to get you there? Do you have to go somewhere? I mean, what happens then? How do you train up and how do you get yourself actually in the seat? So what's that progression like?
And so I went into the commanding officer's office and told him, and and he was disappointed. I mean, excited for me, but disappointed that he was going to lose me because I was the first woman coming through Tomcats. I was the only woman in the squadron training up for pilot. That there was one NFO. And so he was looking forward to me getting on deployment and sort of breaking that glass ceiling, so to speak. There were a couple of women on the West Coast also, and things weren't going as well. And so he was looking forward to it. He asked me if I could put it on hold a year to go to NASA later. And I said, no, that's not an option.
Oh,
But
dear.
then, in true government fashion, they didn't want to spend any more money teaching me how to fly the Tomcat. And so he let me fly one more dogfight, and then I uh, took a ferry to jet back to Virginia Beach because we were down in Key West at the time. And that was it. I didn't fly another Navy airplane after that.
Wow.
And this was December, and I think we reported to Houston in March for our training.
Right. So then the training, what does that look like then? So I mean, obviously you're a very experienced pilot, from your PPL to the Tomcat to the other airframes that you're involved in as well. Um, I guess the simple question is, how does it feel to fly the space shuttle? How does it handle? I gotta know because I like to fly stuff too. So what does that feel like? I mean, how do you train for it as well?
Well, for a test pilot, the space shuttle is just another airplane. So you have to learn the same stuff. You have to learn the systems, the different limitations, the air speeds, all of that stuff that you would learn with any other airplane. And the biggest thing is you're not going to fly it before you fly it. The very first time you fly the space shuttle is when you're coming back from space. And so you spend a lot of time in different trainer type aircraft. And it's a whole different flight control system than anything I'd ever flown. And that took some getting used to. But the biggest issue with flying the shuttle on reentry and landing is that you've been in space for a while. And so you've been weightless and you have no balance. Your vestibular system has not been calibrated for however long you've been in space. So when you're coming back, if you move your head, you get really dizzy and you feel really heavy. I think at point 2 Gs, I felt like I was under 2 Gs. And so you just feel really heavy and you have the big helmet on your head and so everything about it is weird to for lack of a better term. It's just a hard thing to do. And everybody's watching you. You've got a multi-million, billion-dollar vehicle that you're flying, and you have no engines, so you don't get to add power and go around and try it again. And so it's just, there's a lot of pressure. And that's why it was always test pilots that they hired for being a shuttle pilot, was because every flight was a test flight.
Yeah.
The pilot doesn't physically do the landing, the touchdown in the shuttle. The senior pilot, who is the commander, does the landing. So the pilot will get a little bit of stick time, but the commander, as long as everything's going well, the commander will do the landing. But never in the history of the shuttle did a pilot do the landing because the commander's side always worked. And
Right.
so it's
Wow.
different.
I can imagine. So, in the simple form, on a scale of 1 to just don't bother, how difficult is it to land the space shuttle?
Once you get the hang of the difference in the flight control systems, I mean, if somebody's an engineer, it's a rate system. So if in regular airplanes, if you pull back on the stick or the yoke or whatever, and you hold it, then you're going to do a constant rate of climb. But in the shuttle, if you pull it back and hold it, it's going to accelerate its rate of climb. So you have to pull it back and then push it back to the middle to get it to hold that rate of climb. And so it's just a different, mathematically or from an engineering point of view, it's completely different. But like anything else, once you get used to it and you practice it over and over again, it becomes second nature.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm sure there are many people who have bought like space shuttle simulators for their computer and they fly the space shuttle all the time. So it's anybody can do it.
Yeah. Well, it's a very big difference between a simulation and then having all of that stuff to go off of there. So can you so from my understanding, so 2 space missions, can you walk us through both of those then? So I mean, without, I know we've got it's probably a long story, this one, but I'd love to just dig into it. So what was the whole experience like? Give us the full package. How did it feel? What was it like? What was it like that moment when the countdown hit 0 and then it was just, rockets away? Yeah, so start to finish, highlights, best bits, moments of scare, all of it.
Okay. STS 83 was in April of 1997, and it was the first flight. And we're all suited up and ready to go. But as a pilot, everybody asks, were you nervous or scared? And I was more focused on doing everything I had to do right. There's a whole bunch of steps that the pilot has to do concerning the hydraulic systems, the electrical systems, the engines, everything. And if you don't do them in the right order or in the allowed amount of time, the launch doesn't go. It's scrubbed. And it had happened that a pilot had not finished everything in the right amount of time because he was being so careful to do everything that the launch scrubbed. And I didn't want to be that pilot that got that notoriety. So I was very focused on getting through my steps in the right order in the right amount of time. So I had no time to really be scared or think about sitting on top of all that rocket fuel or anything like that. And then once you get inside of 30 seconds, pretty much you're just sitting there waiting and monitoring your systems and the countdown. It's basically up to the computer at this point. And the engines will light at 6 seconds before you launch, and the computers quickly check out the engines and then fire the rockets. And if everything is going well, there's nothing else to be done until you get on orbit. Everything happens automatically. But we had trained for over a year on how to handle all the things that could go wrong. And so mainly I was monitoring the engines, the hydraulics and the electrical systems. Those are all the pilot stuff. And on the commander's side, he's monitoring the computers and talking to the ground. And very quickly, you're shaking. Like it's pretty violent coming off the launch pad as you go. And you go from 0 to supersonic in 30 seconds. And the G forces start to increase. In tactical aircraft, the G forces are through your spine, so you're well supported. But in the space shuttle, you're lying on your back, so the G forces are through your abdomen, and you get squished. And so that's kind of uncomfortable. And for the space shuttle, you would increase up to 3 Gs until about 2 minutes when the solid rocket boosters would jettison off. And then you'd go back to slowly increasing back up to 3 Gs. The whole launch to orbit is 8.5 minutes long. It's pretty quick. But the last 2 minutes, you're 3 Gs with, it feels like an elephant is sitting on your chest, basically. And I remember looking at the clock to figure out how much longer before the elephant gets off. And then there's points in the launch where there's a breath of relief, like when the rockets come off successfully, because that's where Challenger was lost, was right before the solid rocket boosters detached. And then everybody's like, okay, I can breathe now. And then you have points like you don't want to lose an engine at that point because then you have to somehow do this crazy maneuver and go back to Kennedy Space Center. And then if you make it past that point, if you lose an engine, you land in Spain or Africa. That's not quite as scary. And then you can say, okay, we're going to make it to orbit even if we lose an engine now. So there's all these stages. Once you get to orbit, the engines shut off and you're weightless. It's instant. So we can keep talking about STS-83 if you would like. We got to orbit. We get unstrapped, unsuited, start doing all the things. And then the ground calls up and says, we're seeing a problem with your electrical systems. And we have 3 fuel cells that are oxygen and hydrogen that we mix together to make electricity. It makes a lot of water, but then that extra electron puts together to make electricity, and that's how everything is powered. And one of ours looked like it might overheat and catch on fire, and that's never good. So they monitored it for a while, and the next day they said, hey, you're going to have to shut that system down, and you're going to have to come home early. And so that was pretty devastating to some of the folks on orbit because it was their one and only chance to fly in space. Our payload specialists were there to do the science, and they just heard that their whole mission was being cut and they weren't going to get to do all of their science. And we had to do all the emergency procedures involved in shutting that fuel cell down and preparing to come home. And we landed on day 4.
Wow. And then you got a second chance. So, and then let's run through that one then. So, I mean, going to space is one of those things where it's just, my God. I mean, number one, I mean, astronauts in general must be the most sought after job in the world and the most difficult competitive one for. So, any experience of being able to get up there, just gold dust. So, experience number 2, run us through that one then. Anything different there?
Yeah, we were very fortunate because they did say we're going to fly you again, which put the payload specialists at ease that they were going to get to do their science. And only 3 months later, the same crew, the same shuttle, the same experiments, everything. We launched back up into space and everything went perfectly. No failures on orbit. And so we were able to complete the 16 days of science that we had planned for. Now, I was a pilot on a science mission. I had no science responsibilities. I was kind of the jack of all trades. I was the medical doctor, the repair person, the photographer, which was great because I got to spend a lot of time photographing Earth. And, so I just pretty much had all these tasks that I did throughout the day. And then I helped the scientists when they needed it.
Terrific. So let's get into the leadership part of that too then. So you've obviously got an incredible leadership profile. And I think one of the interesting things about that situation there too is from my own studies, for my own PPL, I've recognized that the pilot in command has the final say and the only say essentially. So you are the one who is in control of the situation. I'm wondering how that differs with something like the space shuttle, because I mean, obviously you got, a lot of influences in play. You've got ground control, you've got the other team as well, who are all very, very versed, advanced, experienced people as well, who obviously have very relevant opinions. So when you look at leading in an environment like that, how do you kind of manage that? How do you kind of, yeah, how do you sort of tackle a situation like that? And I imagine also in a situation where things did go wrong, you had the adverse effect, that first one, something did go wrong. How do you deal with that? Because I assume that is probably what we would consider crisis management in a way, really, isn't it, to some degree? So how do you manage that?
The commander on board has the ultimate responsibility of the shuttle and the crew. And so as a pilot, I am working for the commander. Mission control and the flight director also has overall control of everything. And so mission control has a book about this thick with all the flight rules that govern what you can and can't do. So on the first flight, when we shut down that fuel cell, his flight rule specifically says you have to come home because you are now one failure away from possible catastrophic failure. So there's not any leeway there. Once he made the decision to shut down the fuel cell, we're coming home. The commander would be in ultimate control if we weren't talking to mission control, and then he would be the one saying, or he or she would be the one making all of the decisions. But in this particular case, the leadership came from how do I keep this team focused on the new task at hand, which is shutting down the system, reducing our electrical load because we now have reduced electricity. How do I keep the morale up of everyone who's had their trip cut short? So it becomes more of a therapy type role than anything. Very few things once you're on orbit with the shuttle are so much of a crisis that there needs to be instant decisions made. Fire, of course, would be one, and a pressurization issue would be another. Otherwise, you have time to talk about it, consult with mission control, and make all the decisions based on all the information that you have.
I see. That makes a whole lot of sense. I can imagine it's difficult, but also you're the person for the job to do that for sure. And you had that training, and that would have obviously taught you all of that. And then you went and executed it all perfectly because ultimately you're still here, your teammates are still there, and the right decisions were all made. So I'm very glad about that, by the way, too. So one more thing I want to ask about kind of leadership then as well is just I love to try and get a few things out of this that are really, really kind of copy and paste for people too. So obviously your experience there is very unique. Not many people are going to find themselves up in the space shuttle, up in space, having to face these kinds of catastrophic things and situations where just one bad decision could be completely fatal to the mission, the crew, the people, everyone. So I guess from those experiences you just listed out there and mentioned, someone in business or someone in sports or even kind of like family stuff too, what can we kind of strip away from that? And when we bring it down to its core principles and basics and kind of like really benefit from and start to kind of apply into our own lives coming out of this podcast then?
Gosh, I think that one of the things that comes to mind is aviate, navigate, communicate. And of course, that applies to the aviation world. You're going to keep the airplane flying first, keep everybody safe. Two, you're going to navigate to where you got to go. And three, then you talk about what's happening or you notify the controllers. But it applies to everything else as well. even like teaching your kids how to drive a car, let's say you want to teach them that the first thing is the safety of the vehicle and the cars around you. So just because you want to get off at this exit, you don't veer off in this exit. You have to first be safe. If you miss the exit, then you navigate around to figure out a different way. Sometimes you can't communicate what you're doing to everybody. So it applies to everything. Even in venture capital, you 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 keep the everything going first. Handle the emergency stuff first, and then you can figure out what's the next step. Okay, so we made a bad investment, perhaps. Well, we're going to close that down. We're not going to put more money into it at this point, or we're going to start helping this company, maybe send one of us to advise them. How are we going to handle that situation? And then where are we going to go from here? And then we might put out a press release on what happened. I mean, it's just aviate, navigate, and then communicate.
Great. I love it. Fantastic answer. Thank you for that. So, what we need to get into now then is all the exciting stuff that you're up to now. So I was wondering if, like we kind of did at the start, going from very early doors to getting into the Navy, and then we've kind of progressed from there into the missions, and we've kind of gone through this thing. The one piece we're missing now is just from, stepping off the space shuttle for that last time. I know you went back into the Navy after that, but just kind of the whole transition out of it into what you're doing now, obviously venture capital, public speaking, and an author as well. So can you kind of give us a snapshot of what that experience of, kind of transitioning out was like for you, and how you found your footing in a very different world of doing this and did so well with it?
Well, you have to think, how do you leave NASA? I mean, if I would have stayed, I could have flown again as a pilot, flown again and flown as a commander, and stayed at NASA. But I got married and I happened to fall in love with the Navy SEAL, and he wasn't going to live in Houston. He was living in Virginia. Actually, he was living in Germany at the time we got married, but he was living in Virginia, and we started a family. And so when he got orders to Puerto Rico to be the commander of a SEAL unit down in Puerto Rico, I had to make a decision. Am I going to keep the family together, and I was expecting our second child, or was I going to stay at NASA and fly the space shuttle again? And ultimately, the right decision for me was to keep the family together. And we had women in NASA doing every every possibility. Eileen Collins had children and she flew again and then flew as commander. Pam Melroy didn't have children. Katie Coleman had a child, and they tag teamed each other with the dad up in Massachusetts and her in Houston, and they flew back and forth all the time. Anything was possible. So when I sat down and had to make a decision, ultimately I decided to keep the family unit together and left NASA and went back to the regular Navy. And then I stayed in the Navy until retirement. We had three children then, went on to have four, and I stayed home for a short while my husband was deployed all the time, and started to reinvent myself. And I said, well, what can I do? What do my experiences lend itself to? I thought about going back to school, perhaps getting a PhD, but I decided that what I really enjoyed was the inspiration part of it, um, especially young people, children, teenagers, college age kids, young professionals. I really enjoyed the mentorship, me helping guide them in what they wanted to do, and got a lot of satisfaction out of it. In fact, it's the most satisfaction I get now is working with young folks and seeing them get some sort of inspiration to do something else or to do something they want to do.
Yeah.
And so that's when I started speaking. I would get a lot of requests for speaking. And I finally kind of sort of built that into a profession. But my most pleasure came when I worked with educators, maybe doing little STEM camps here and there. Not a lot of money in it, but a lot of fun and a lot of personal reward.
That's great.
And
So,
otherwise, I was
author, yeah.
asked to
Mm.
be a venture capitalist. Oh, sorry. I asked if I would join a venture capital group, and this was completely out of my wheelhouse, no comfort zone at all. I knew very little, if nothing, about venture capital. And I asked, why? Why would you want me? And they wanted somebody to weigh in on all the startup companies involving space and flying. And I thought, well, okay, that makes sense. I can do that. And I've learned so much that I never thought about in the past about all of these startup companies, young companies, entrepreneurs, invest in every penny they have in a project, and that's been a pretty rewarding as well.
Absolutely. I can only imagine. And you've done some really great work and you're still doing it now. But I got a couple of names to mention here to you then. So, an unlikely astronaut and snakes in the cockpit. So, give us the run through of these books then. So, you've clearly got some serious experience to back it, and you've put it into a children's book, and you're also in the process of doing an adult's book as well. So, what can we expect from these? And we'll go into the shameless plug in a minute where we can then go and find them and hopefully grab some.
An unlikely astronaut was a COVID project, and I thought I want to write a kid's book. And so I wrote the text fairly quickly. And then I'm like, now what? And I had seen a post on Facebook from a guy named Francis French, and he had co-authored a children's book, and it was a space-related children's book. So I cold called him and said, "Hey, would you be interested in helping me edit this children's book?" And he agreed to do it. And I said, "And oh, by the way, do you know any illustrators or publishers?" And he introduced me to a woman, Becky, who lives in the UK. She's a CPA by trade. She happens to dabble in art for fun, and she agreed to be the illustrator. And then we used a publisher that Francis knew as well. So it all just sort of fell into place. And the book is about how if some poor little girl running around in her bare feet in Georgia can grow up to fly the space shuttle, then kids can do anything. And that's the whole message is if I can do this, you can do whatever it is you want to do. And it's gotten pretty good feedback, I think. And then the other book, which I'm writing now, is not for kids. It's called Snakes in the Cockpit. And basically, it's life lessons that I've learned along the way that are applicable to anybody in any stage of their life, like facing fear. How do you face fear? There are a lot of people in this world that are afraid of public speaking. I was one of them. How do you face that fear and uh, and still do it, even though you're terrified? You break out in a cold sweat. That's one of the life lessons, and there's many like that I've
Brilliant.
learned along the way.
That's fantastic. I'd like to ask for one of them. So, a question I've become quite keen on asking at the end of each podcast now, which I've got some really, really great answers from, have been if you had a minute to speak to the young you, so 12, 13-year-old Susan, you had that minute to just have a little whisper in the ear, just a bit of something for that journey ahead, that key bit of advice, the golden nugget from all of this that you've done that you could just, transfer to the young you looking forward. What would that be? Maybe that's one of those life lessons from that book, or maybe it's something else. What have you got for us?
I'd like to say don't doubt yourself. Just do it. Don't spend much time doubting whether you can. Just give it a try. You'd be surprised at what you can do if you just try. And the fear of not succeeding is no reason not to try.
Yeah. I totally agree. So true. And, very different from flying the space shuttle, but even a podcast like this, I was also very afraid of public speaking. It took me 36 episodes to even get the video on, and it's been the best thing that could have ever happened to me doing this podcast. And speaking to just terrific people like you today is the greatest honor, and I'm very proud to be able to do it. But that's been the four questions for today. Before we wrap this up, I think it would be great to just kind of tie in the book then. So we always have a shameless plug moment. So can you just kind of let us know really where best to go and pick up a copy, where we can find more out about you, and any kind of social media stuff going on where we can kind of stay up to date on things, or an email list, or yeah, just have that couple of minutes of just plug, and we will go to that right after we finish up here, I hope.
Great. Well, it's pretty simple. SusanKilrain.com has everything. It has more about me. It has photos for downloading. It has my social media. It has a way to contact if somebody has questions, or basically if somebody wants to hire me or whatever. It has a place to buy the book. The other book isn't out yet. The Snakes in the Cockpit's not out yet, but it'll be out in a year. So it's all in one-stop shopping, and you can't buy anything from the website, but it has links to where you can. And then there's other places that sell the children's book as well.
Fantastic. Well, Susan, I'm going to make sure to send as many people as I can over to there. It's all going to be links and descriptions and captions and stuff too, and I'll make sure to post about it as well. So guys, go and do that, pick up a copy, and keep an eye out for the new book coming out hopefully soon as well. But for now, Susan, all I can say is I'm just honored, so humbled by this, and I just really appreciate your time and for coming on the podcast today. It's been a great, fantastic episode to tick off that bucket list item for me, and I'm just so pleased to have met you. Thank you.
Thanks, Louie. It's been fun.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you guys for listening. This was episode 152. If you'd like to listen to the past episodes, go and have a look at the channel. And if you'd like to listen in for the future ones too, make sure to hit the subscribe button and spread some love by leaving a like and a comment. Signing off for now. See you in the next one.